My mate Ian has reduced his emissions linked to heat by over 50% in the last 3 years. And that means his costs are much lower than they could have been during this energy crisis, and his emissions are really quite low. I'm really impressed. So today on Low Carbon Lifestyle, we're going to go visit Ian and find out exactly how he's done it. My name is Tom, and this is a little series about a low carbon lifestyle. This is Ian. I've known Ian for a little over 10 years, and since I've been doing videos on YouTube, Ian has been one of my more engaged supporters. He comes from an engineering background, so we talk some of the same language, but he's also got experience teaching and most recently supporting the food bank in Durham. He lives here in this house with Julianne and his 3 kids. So Ian, thanks for having me around.
No problem.
To see all you've done at the house here. So talk me through it. You've got a 50% reduction in your gas use in 3 years, and that's massive. Talk me through where you started.
So we were looking around and thinking, what could we do? And some of the easiest things that we did was, first of all, looked in the attic of the old part of the house and thought, this is unusable. I can't get up here. So we're not needing access, and why don't we just insulate it up to the max? So I basically went and bought this now 200mm makeup insulation, which is quite wide. It's not designed to fit in between the rafters, but it lays across in the opposite direction. And I put 7 rolls of that in there myself. It took a couple of hours to do. Yeah. The impact of that was immediate. Okay. I think we get onto that later on, but immediately we noticed on the colder side of the house, the 2 bedrooms facing the north were immediately warmer. Okay, yeah. And I just went over everything in that. The old hatch, which is inaccessible because it's built over the top of some cupboards and things, we couldn't use it anyway. All that, closed it off, insulated over the top of it. It only took 7 rolls, so it was about £120.
Bro.
And that was really effective. I think what you've got to do with you, if you come to a house like this, which has got history, you have to look and see what can I do to make it effective for whatever heating system goes in. Yeah. And the answer to that is insulate. Yeah. Whatever you do, insulation pays back very quickly. It's faster in something like this than a lot of the calculations, especially with the savings that we've had, or the reduction. I mean, the savings have been wiped out with the price rises, but the savings in what we could have achieved in long term, I think we paid for that in about 5 or 6 months. It wasn't long.
Yeah. One winter.
Yes, that was the first step. Insulate the roof space. The following year, so we had some reduction in usage because of just more insulation in the roof.
Yeah. And we'll go into the detail of that on the graph later on.
On the graph later on, yeah. So you can see the raw data showing each year a reduction. Yeah. And there's reasons for that. The first one, from 2019 to 2020, the reduction was the insulation. Okay. Yeah. The next thing we did, we were looking at the fabric of the house. We had this problem with water damp in the front wall. It's got a plaster render or concrete cement render. I'll get it right. Cut that bit out. It's got a cement render on the front wall, and that kind of captures the water and stays a bit damp. Yeah. Anything that's damp is the enemy of heat. Absolutely. So we decided to spend a bit of money. We were going to have the front of the house refurbished, and that was all going to be taken off with cladding and stuff put on the front. In the end, other things on the roof needed our attention more. So we had a limited budget. We knew we were going to have to spend some money on the roof. So hopefully now what that means is there's going to be no driven rain, wetness getting in through either cement render at the end or through in between the tiles or whatever there might be any gaps. That's not the leak. That was followed very shortly by us qualifying for one of these schemes for the boiler replacements and having the house looked at in terms of insulation in the walls. We had previously had a 37-year-old floor standing Meissen cast iron heat exchanger boiler. Okay, yeah. Which was
proper piece of kit.
It was old. This was lit by a pilot light, so it was always on with a flame, as the older systems were. This was probably typical 20, 30, 40 years ago, that kind of thing, before the old piezoelectric ignition systems came in. So it was reliable, but it wasn't very efficient. Even though I got it cleaned every year, the boiler companies come round, I think it was TW Steam, very good. It was time really for it to go. So we had the hot water service repiped at a point before all this other work was done. But then eventually we had all of this work done where we took out the cylinder and the old boiler and had a combi boiler put in. In the end, it was actually more realising that we could save enough money between now and whenever we might replace it with something else to make it worthwhile. Plus the scheme was giving us a chunk of money. We still had to put some money towards it because the boiler for this size of house, it's a 5-bedroom detached, was going to have to be larger than the boiler scheme would cover, so we had a few £100 to put towards it. At the same time, they came around and did a full review of, the same company this was, did a full review of the insulation in this part of the house. So the cavity has got the thermal blocking on this one. On the other side, on the old house, it had somebody come round and blow fibre into it. Which was fairly typical, I suppose, at the time when people were sort of getting interested in insulation, it would do. Problem with fibre is it settles. So underneath each window, if it ever got that far, it would then drop and you'd end up with a cold bridge under all the windows, which is more or less where you put your radiators. So eventually, your radiators are basically pouring heat into a cold bridge and not into the rest of the room. So they came in and they vacuumed out all of the old fibre and redid the cavity insulation using I think it was the polystyrene beads that then had an activator in to lock it, so it wasn't a beady sort of finished, it becomes a slab. Very short order, we had the roof work done to reduce moisture getting into the house, the boiler replaced, and we had the insulation done, and it was pretty much in that order. So starting off in around about October, the scaffolding went up, and by the time we got to January, the boiler was in, and by the end of January, the insulation was done as well. So it was quite a busy period of time. But again, the biggest thing, that made the biggest difference in our gas use, obviously because of the new boiler, but because it wasn't topping up a cylinder all the time.
Just burning the amount of gas you need for the water you need and hot water as well as heat.
That's it. So it was on demand, and that if we look back at the graph on that one, you can see the 2021 and 2022 figures. There's an almost zero use of gas in August, July time. It drops significantly compared to the previous years when we were trying to top up a tank of water, and that's just the effect of not having to maintain a load of heat energy in something that you're not using that much in reality. Finally, once we've got this more advanced system in, we've been able to play around with it. I left that for a year, and then I sort of, you'd done a video about adjusting the boiler flow temperatures and so on. But I'd already started to play around with the boiler flow temperatures for both the hot water and the heating. When these things get fitted, they whack them up to full and they come off, with 85 degrees heating and 60 degrees water and so on.
It's hot, it's okay.
It's going to kill everything, including your hands, if you leave it in there too much. But I've reduced the hot water down to what you might call a thermally safe level. It's about mid-40s. And the heating, we did turn it up slightly in the last winter to around about 53-ish thereabouts, but the heating flow has been reduced to 48.
Great.
I did it in 2 steps. I took it down to about maybe 55 first and then to 48 to see how it would cope.
See if anyone notices as well,
That's it. It's one of those trial and error type of things. So with the lower flow temperatures, some of the radiators didn't really respond that well. Some of the ones like this one, newish with a decent pipe to it.
A big surface area.
Big surface area, a nice sized volume of water in there and also in the pipework. That's great. Certainly I could though change a couple of the radiators in the coldest rooms. Increase the size.
Ian sent me some of his data. Let's have a quick look about what he has done. So if we start with the baseline of 2019, Ian and the family used 20,000 kilowatt hours, 20,120 kilowatt hours of natural gas in 2019. During 2020, Ian went up into the attic and installed 7 200mm rolls of insulation. So that brought the kilowatt hours for 2020 down by about 10%. So nearly 2,000 kilowatt hours was the drop there, which is pretty interesting. Just from 7 rolls of DIY loft insulation for about 120 quid. Okay, 2021 is a significant step here. So they had the new boiler, they had new cavity wall insulation, There was some roof work as well, which reduced some of the moisture ingress. So we went from, in 2020, 18,000 kilowatt hours to 2021, 13,200 kilowatt hours. So in total so far, we've had a 35% reduction from the baseline. And then that year, the impact of the new boiler and the new cavity wall was a 25% reduction year on year. Pretty amazing. And then finally, 2022. So what did Ian change for 2022? He just reduced the boiler flow temperatures. So reducing that so that the boiler condenses more, but also reducing the temperature that the boiler heats hot water to. So for 2022, the boiler at Ian's house burnt 9,346 kilowatt hours. That's down from 20,000 in 2019. That's a 54% reduction in gas use. And I think that's just incredible. You can see on the graph that the impact each year, really over the summer, gas use goes to very, very little because they're just using enough gas to heat the hot water they need. I've talked about degree days previously on this channel. If we use degree days, we can check whether these drops were contributed to by warmer weather. If we were warmer in 2021 to 2020 or 2022 to 2021, that would explain some reduction. But it could also prove to us that we're using less kilowatt hours per degree day. So let's have a look at what the degree days tell us. I did a bit of analysis using the degree days, and so I've only got data for 3 years worth of degree days. You've got 2020 in yellow, 2021 in blue, and then 2022 in this kind of browny colour. So per degree day, Ian used this many kilowatt hours each year. And you can see that from 2020, 2021 and 2022, we have this reduction in the amount of gas used per degree day. And this is proving that despite the weather, what Ian's done has made it more efficient. So the loft insulation, the cavity wall insulation, the new boiler, and then the reduced flow temps has really had an impact on how much heat and how much gas Ian and the family have used.
But yeah, 50% reduction in gas use through some updated insulation and new boiler operate efficiently and better building fabric.
Yeah.
I'm occasionally guilty of all this stuff of jumping straight to the technology.
Yes.
So saying that we need to have heat pumps or solar panels or whatever it would be. And if you told me that insulation and a new boiler was all you've done, I'd have said 10-15% reduction in gas use, maybe 20 at best, but 50% is amazing.
Yeah.
So what was difficult in that process, and is there anything you might have done differently if you had done it again or could have planned it differently?
I think if the difficulties probably were to try and just decide to do the job in the first place. Throughout all of this, I actually had to give up my job as assistant head teacher just on medical grounds.
Right, yeah.
So I've had to self-fund a year and so on. Just to, on top of all that lot, then these changes were significant in terms of the amount of money that we might have had spare. We did have some savings we put away, so we were able to do it. Hence why the scheme comes along at the right time. So the difficulty then would be paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I had to do this all on my own, regardless of what it would cost, I might have bulked at 1 or 2 bits.
Yeah.
We might still be on the old boiler.
Sure.
If we did it again, I might have done a lot of the work together. It would be more difficult to say what the impact of each individual part would be.
Sure.
The way I've done it, actually, we get quite a nice chunk of data to say, well, that seems to have done this seems to have done that, and that. So it's perhaps better from an interested point of view. One of the things I think I would have liked to have done was that front cladding.
Okay.
Because behind the front cladding we were going to put this gold multi-layered insulation in it and try and insulate the front wall. We would have got rid of all the cement render that's still on there, the pebble dash and everything. Still on there. We would have cleaned that off and put some shiplap cladding or whatever with an insulation behind it, and that would have hopefully kept that wall dry. As it is, it's probably still not ideal.
Sure.
That would have cost another couple of £1,000, and we just didn't have it at the time. So that would have been my choice. We'd updated the look of the house as well, but I think that's the major thing in what we've done. I might also have, because doing the insulation together with the boiler and everything else that had happened, knowing the impact that would have had on the U values of the building, the structures and everything else, I would have probably said, well, don't worry about getting a bigger boiler. Okay. Instead of a 35 kilowatt plus whatever the hot water comes in at, I might have said, okay, look, the scheme pays for 30, just put 30 in, or it would have been even, it could even be less. There's a choice. So we could have saved some of the money by going with a smaller boiler that was fully covered by the scheme and not paying for a proportion of it.
And I guess that's one of the things that I see quite often is where we might have oversized a boiler system because it's quite forgiving and it will heat a building no matter what size it is. But when I'm looking at heat pumps, if we oversize a heat pump, then all of a sudden we're going to be starting cycling,
yes.
Our efficiency is going to drop. So getting that sizing perfect with a heat pump is much more important. And I imagine there wasn't a heat loss assessment to estimate exactly what the heat loss was going to be when that boiler was put in.
No. I mean, the heat loss on this, it'll be quite interesting to try and establish exactly what the different rooms are in terms of thermal efficiency. Trying to calculate the U value of stuff you haven't really seen or put in is difficult. But a better estimation could have been done, but the scheme wasn't really set up for that.
Sure.
It was there to say, look, you've got this, you've got a 5-bedroom, it's detached, therefore you need this bigger size boiler.
Yeah.
And really you don't argue. They're paying for most of it, we pay a few hundred on top, fine, put it in, that's fine. And they've done a really good job.
Great. So burning less gas, less emissions, less cost if we've not had an energy crisis, but are you more, with the insulation you've done, are you more comfortable now, or have you noticed the change in comfort over that time?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as we put that makeup insulation in, because I just went over the whole lot, I closed that loft access off and I went over the whole thing evenly. As soon as we noticed immediately that night, it was warmer. It was warmer. Right. So straight away, insulation is an instant hit.
And I think with insulation, we can be guilty of, okay, what's the payback on that insulation, or what's in terms of cost or emissions or whatever it would be. Yeah. But the reality is, if it's a more comfortable place to be, you can't quantify that payback. It's just better.
You can't put a price on comfort. I mean, people are uncomfortable. They think, well, I wish I could do something about it. Well, to do something about it, it cost me for the 3-bedroomed original side, if you like, of a 5-bedroomed house. It cost me 120 some pounds, 121 pounds or so, plus a couple of hours to make that side of the house instantly and noticeably warmer.
What's next? I'm sure you've got plans for your house, because you're always tinkering little things and talking about good things. Is there anything else you got your eye on for the house? Would you consider solar PV? Would you consider a heat pump? What's the plan?
Yeah, well, yes. I think the original point was we've got to be more efficient, because no matter what you do, burning less is burning less. So a lot of people get hung up on the fact that, to do that I've got to burn nothing. That's a bit like the Stop Burning Stuff campaign. It's brilliant, but you can do it in stages. So what we had was a very inefficient system. We've gone to a more efficient system, which is surprisingly
very
more
surprisingly
efficient. And the improvements we've done, anyone can do. It's not weird, unobtainable stuff. And
not that much disruption either.
No.
Scaffolding on the outside is a bit of a faff, and then changing the boiler in the winter is a bit of a faff. But it seems like it was all done without much disruption.
It was done. The boiler was changed in a day.
Okay.
Everything. And that. So I mean, one day without a bit of heat, it doesn't make much of a difference, does it? The scaffolding outside, that stayed for about maybe 10 weeks, which was, we had to work around it, but it wasn't that bad. No. I think I might still like to go and try and do the front cladding eventually, but that's now going to be more cosmetic.
Sure.
There's no real need for that to happen thermally, I think. But in the future, well, I actually see this boiler, even though it's brand new, it's 2 years old. Even though it's a new boiler, the fact that these newer boilers might not be as long-term reliable, I'm not saying they're definitely going to break, but you hear more and more stories about things breaking. By the time we get to face that, I think it will be around about 2028, 2030.
Okay.
And at that time, then if we're still here, I will be looking at a heat pump. I'll have probably already put in solar PV. And I know your math says no, but I would have probably also put in a battery storage.
Okay.
Because honest, I've just heard of a scheme where they can take old Nissan Leaf batteries and basically hang them on the wall and use a normal inverter, and it's all open source and free to do. You know,
and if it's a 24 kilowatt-hour battery from a Nissan Leaf, it's a huge
battery. It's a huge battery because you're normally buying, I don't know, you're normally buying 5, maybe 7 kilowatt hours in a pack, like a Tesla Powerwall or whatever. Also, in the future, but I've got my eye on a particular vehicle which also has solar panels built into it, so it's kind of a solar electric vehicle. And the one I've put my money behind is Aptera.
Okay.
And Aptera are producing, effectively, it's an auto trike or whatever. It's a 3-wheeled, not car. So I'm quite excited about that one. So what I think for the UK versions will be 2025.
Okay.
So I'm looking to change cars at that point. At that point, my trusty old Vectra will be 18 years old.
I can flee the nest.
I know, and I've owned that car since brand new. And if we do go for a charger, it'll be probably the My Energy Zappi, because it seems to be more integrated.
And linked to the panels that might be on the roof at some point.
Yeah, panels on the roof. We'll look for all sorts of different things. We'll probably end up going back to a storage system, because having a tank storage is a good buffer for spare energy. You divert your excess into that, and you've got free hot water. So eventually it will be, there'll be battery storage, there'll be an EV on the drive, there'll be some sort of PV on the roof, and some thermal storage in the house. And if it's going to be liquid water, or if it's going to be a sun amp thermal phase change battery or whatever, those kind of units, then it'll be something along those lines. Now that's where the real money's going to be spent. I mean, at the moment I've been tinkering around the edges and getting schemes and whatnot, but fortunately I should be able to get my pension in about a year's time. I can claim it earlier when I'm 55, so you've got about 18 months to wait for that. And that's where the kind of ultimate end point is.
And I guess if we believe in all this climate change stuff, 2018, the IPCC said we need to reduce our emissions by half by 2030. You've reduced emissions linked to heat by half already, over half, and the grid's going to do a lot of the rest on your behalf. So you're almost already there, and I guess there's lots of other people that won't do that, so everything you can do is going to be a bonus in terms of emissions for us as a society.
I think the catchphrase is every little helps, but there's also a sense in some people that, well, you know, you lot do it first and I'll do it afterwards.
Learn all the lessons almost.
I don't mind being in some of these kind of vanguard groups, if you like, doing various bits and pieces, but to again point out, nothing I've done here is new or novel.
Absolutely.
It's just playing around with what we've got and doing some sensible, sometimes very cheap,
absolutely,
upgrades to the building.
Absolutely. And could be done in homes across this whole part of Durham, couldn't it really?
Absolutely could be done everywhere. With the amount of disruption that has been caused, I think in terms of, if we went and put a clock on it, it would probably be less than 24 hours. For fitting the insulation, for doing the walls, removing the old and putting new, doing the boiler was probably the bigger part of it all. But I reckon you're probably looking at maybe, well, you would certainly be less than a week for a company to come in and do all of that for a house and then go.
And my worry is that there's lots of houses here that are just like, they're kind of like, oh, we're cold, it's because it's a cold house. They don't know they've got the moisture issues that you identified. They don't know that there's an opportunity for the insulating the loft, and they've not put that thought process in that says we could do this not very costly stuff that would really improve our comfort, reduce our bills, etc., etc. And looking around this estate, there's a lot of similar houses, and you kind of like, there's a lot of potential here, isn't there? I've got a pal who lives on the street, maybe 50 doors down. He's just got a big solar array and a battery, and he's got his EV, and he's kind of taken a slightly different approach. But I wonder if there's anything beneficial for him that he can learn from what you've learned, because it'll be a similar builder that built the similar house at the same time. These
were all built sort of mid-60s. The headline stuff, like EV and PV and all the rest of it, you know, these things that are visible, it's great. But if you don't do what we've done, you're throwing it out of the walls and the roof. He might have done those things already, and that's great. But the start with where the need is biggest basically, and if you can insulate, then that doesn't matter what heat system, where you derive the energy from,
It's better.
you'll use less.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the, and what's interesting as well is I think we can get to a stage where, we need to insulate this building, therefore to get it to net zero it needs to be passive house standard and everything's finished. And that would be wonderful to live in, and it would be fantastic. But I think that often puts off organisations and individuals from making a start.
Yeah.
And there's a great essay online which says insulate Britain, yes, but how much?
Yeah.
And if actually it means double glazing and loft insulation and improving some of the moisture, how the moisture can enter a building, then that's maybe enough for us to get to where we need to be. And that's actually not as frightening as it could be.
No.
There's loads we can do, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Brill.
Loads.
And I think you've demonstrated that you can take some meaningful actions, but really have a significant impact on your emissions. And that's
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah.
So Brill. Well, thank you, Ian.
It's been great to share. Thank you.
Definitely.
Okay, so that's Ian's story. By insulating the loft, getting some new cavity wall insulation, replacing the boiler, and setting the boiler to really efficient settings of low flow temperatures, Ian's managed to reduce his gas use by 54%. That mitigates most of the cost increase that we might have seen linked to the energy crisis of the last couple of years. And it also reduces the emissions of that house by about 2 tonnes per year. This is such good progress, and we've not even got to a heat pump yet. It proves to me that if we do some really simple things, like insulating our lofts properly, and then actually moving to more efficient systems, we can really make a big step change in our emissions. And if the challenge is to reduce emissions by half by 2030, Ian gives an example of exactly how to achieve that, and gives us a little bit more time to get to a truly low carbon heating system by using a heat pump. It was great to talk to Ian about all he's done at home. Was there anything that resonated there? Do you see any opportunities in your own home? Please do let me know with a comment below. Cheers.